Okay, so do we begin then, Geeta?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Very happy to welcome you to another session of discussing cinema. This time we will be discussing the Hindi film Kalpana, which released in 1948. The film was suggested to Talking Films Online by Pritha Chakrabarti, who is leading the discussion today. Pritha is a visiting assistant professor of writing at the Center for Writing and Pedagogy, Kriya University. Prior to this, she has taught media theory, journalism, film studies, and writing at various institutes of Symbiosis International. Preeta is also a resource person for OUP and she conducts webinars and develops content on creative pedagogy for school teachers and regularly conducts workshops across various colleges and universities on academic writing and critical thinking. She has a PhD in cultural studies from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, which is how we all know her. And has been researching the intersection of caste, class, labor, gender, and nationalism with Indian cinema and performing arts. Her doctoral dissertation on politics of screen dance in Indian cinema tracks the history of changing body image of the screen dancer in Indian cinema in general and Hindi cinema in particular. A Bharatanatyam dance practitioner, Pritha has also worked at Media Lab Jadavpur University as a film archivist. She has been a recipient of the Indian Cine.ma Film Research Fellowship for 2012-13, the CSDS ICSSR Doctoral Fellowship, and the NFAI Film Research Fellowship for 2020. Her current research project examines the gradual disappearance or marginalization of screen dance in Hindi film narratives. Thank you, Pritha, for agreeing to suggest a film and leading the discussion today, and what a film to suggest for all of us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for the very, very kind words with which you began. I'm really glad that, as you mentioned, people who have watched the film, they really like the film, and that's in a lot of ways it feels it's very personal, because this is a film which has not been watched very widely or discussed very widely, and as a dancer and as a film which is one of its kind, a dance film in Indian cinema, I personally feel very attached to the film, and the fact that people are watching it is something that gives me a lot of joy. So thank you so much, Nicola, Geeta, and Talking Films Online for giving this opportunity and platform to talk about this film and discuss it in the light of the different things that the film brings forth. So I would like to begin talking about the film with the life of Uday Shankar, because as many of you already might know, that it is a semi-autobiographical film. It's not it is a film which is a fantasy. It is a dance film. It is also a film which tracks the life and times and work of Uday Shankar as a modern dancer in India. So this film, as in terms of the timeline of the film in the life of Uday Shankar, it was produced right after his own cultural center at Almora, which went on for about 4 years. It closed down. And this is the idea of making the film also took root and germinated in Almora. And the intention was not so much to experiment with the film medium, but more from Shankar basically wanted to make a documentary which would help him promote and publicize the center and raise funds for it, very much like the narrative within the film. And the story was written in Almora. The name Kalpana was conceived in Almora, and the scenario, as Mohan Khokar informs us, was prepared by Uday Shankar's one of the most talented pupils, Guru Dutt, whom we all know, who later went on to become a leading film actor and director. So the film was the finance of the film was not very easy to come by, and it was originally financed by a baronet, Sir Chunubhai. And however, this is right during the Second World War, and raw stock, as we know, it became impossible to procure. And by the time the film was completed, almost 3 to 4 years later, the cost had soared from the original budget of 11 lakhs to 22 lakhs. So, a company called Stage and Screen Presentations was floated for the purpose of making this film. Uh, yeah. And eventually, what happened is that to meet the increasing budget and expenditure of the film, the company was mortgaged and the work was held up for 6 months. And this kept on happening. The film, interestingly, was not shot in Almora or even Calcutta, where it was originally intended to be shot, but it was shot in Madras in the Gemino Studios. And the proprietor S.S. Vasan, who we of course know, he was himself a film producer and director. He was extremely interested in the project. The dance sequences in the film, which are overall about 80, and they were shot over a stretch of 90 days with alternate weeks of day and night shift, as Mohan Khokar informs us. Shankar was extremely anxious to first complete with the dance. So the dances were first shot, and then after that the rest of the film was shot, which also probably explains a little the way the film is structured. There are certain gaps in that narrative, and that often that can be thought of as a deliberate thing, but in this case it was possibly due to practical reasons. So the artists who were acting and performing in the film, they were all new. None of them had any experience of ever acting, which also probably explains the high tone of the performances. There were over 30 boys. They were all Kathakali trained, and they were recruited from Kerala, and 20 girls who were dancers, brought from Chennai, and some of them, such as Lalita, Padmini, and Usha Kiran, of course, later went on to become leading film artists in their own life. So, one important thing to note about Kalpana is that it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a dance film. It's an example of screen dance. So while I said that I'm going to introduce the dance, it was something of a trouble, because do I analyze the dance? Do I analyze the text, or do I analyze the film? And we all know that all of these, the film has its own language, the dance has its own language, and of course there's the language of the narrative that is there. So it was some amount of a bind in terms of how to go about it. But then I thought that let's also incorporate all the three methods in terms of how we look at the film, because looking at one without the other would probably not do justice to the film. So I will quickly share my screen and share with you some of the very interesting materials that I had come across in the course of my own PhD research, my own doctoral dissertation. So this is, can all of you see my screen?
Yes, Pritha, we can see
Okay,
your screen.
great.
Yeah.
So I'll just make it full screen. Yeah. So this is basically the poster, the primary poster of Kalpana, and as you see, it's a collage of multiple different dance sequences that were there. And on the right hand side of the corner, you actually see a installation which comes back in one of Uday Shankar's dream sequences. And incidentally, later when you look at the dream sequences in Hindi cinema in general, and especially Awara, of course, which we all know as it's a famous dream sequence that has been widely talked about in film analysis. There is a huge amount of influence from how the sets are constructed in the dream sequences that is introduced by Shankar for the first time in this film, and then that goes on to inform decades of dream sequence in Hindi cinema. I'm not sure how much it had an impact on other films of other regions, and I would leave that up to you to enlighten me on the same. So this is a film, as I was talking to Nikhila and Geeta at the beginning of the session. This is a film I had first watched in the mid 2000s in the International Film Festival of Calcutta. It was not available at all, and it was a very rare kind of a thing. Before that, earlier in my childhood, I had actually watched some clips of it here and there in the course of certain interviews telecast on Doordarshan. Some of them were, of course, of Amala Shankar, who plays Uma and who is the partner of Uday Shankar. And there were also others, like Zora Sehgal, for instance, who was a student of Uday Shankar. Even she has if I'm not wrong, an interview where she had mentioned about this particular film. So those in through those forms, little parts of the films and little stories of the films stayed with me till I first got a chance to watch it in the late 2000, mid 2000s. And then we heard that, of course, Martin Scorsese and his entire company, they have decided to restore the film. And what you see here is, of course, a quote from him. And when that happened, it was, I still remember like being extremely excited about it. But interestingly enough, after the film was restored, it was stuck for more than a year because it was not being released through the that what is that called, the airport security check, basically. Like they didn't know what how much tax to charge on that or something like that, and the Indian government refused to address it, and there were news everywhere, and people had to really struggle to. So it's not even enough that we don't care for our own films. Even when people outside are restoring it for us, we do not allow it to come into our country. Like we stop it at the gates. Like, so anyhow, this is basically the backdrop of Kalpana. And as I said, the indiancine.ma portal is where Kalpana went up. The unrestored version of Kalpana went up for the first time, and I had the opportunity to work a little on the annotations that are there. And after that, of course, once the restored version came, and we got access to a much better picture quality and sound quality, more importantly, with the restored version. So this is another this is actually the cover page of a song book from Kalpana, and it is sourced from a private archive of film historian SMM Osaja. And it was shared on a Facebook page on Uday Shankar. As you might already be aware, like understand, I'm sort of like a fan, so I follow Facebook pages of Uday Shankar, and from there I happen to also get access to quite exciting materials. This was the bill which announced the credits. And here what you see is, of course, the what are the amount of people who are involved in this thing. But within that, what I would like you to notice is that, when you look at the cast, it's actually very few people compared to how a cast would normal. And that also, it includes extremely insignificant characters. Like, well, if you have one dialogue, I think your name was on the bill. So which also goes on to show the kind of narrative that the film has. The film does not have a lot of characters in conversation with each other. There are conversations, there are dialogues, but most of the conversation probably takes place on stage, takes place through the performances that are interspersed across the film. So these are some of the reviews of the film that came out right after the film was released. And Geeta was just telling us how her father was very excited to hear that we are discussing Kalpana, because he had watched it when in his days, and it was indeed a film which was very critically acclaimed. And it says, you all can just take a look, I will not read it out, but these were overall extremely positive reviews from, and these reviews were not just in India but also in America, and also in Europe. Everywhere that the film got screened, it was widely acclaimed. The film traveled across the world, and in that sense it was a success. In that sense it was quite widely adored and recognized at that point of time. However, when it comes to our own country, as I was saying, and pardon my jibe, but say some place like Cine Times Madras, which was very famous at that time for doing all the reviews of the dances and the performances and the cinema of the time, they came up with a very, very bitter review. And I'll just read this out loud. No one doubts the greatness of Uday Shankar in his manner of presenting the material. But mastery over the manner does not give him mastery over the material. The material used is of the most mediocre variety. One need not go to see Uday Shankar's much boosted Kalpana to hear his profane perorations. He has woefully deceived himself by identifying his genius to placate the popular palate with his so called clairvoyance. The most lamentable thing in Kalpana is that Uday Shankar has apparently betrayed his individual potentialities by persistently refusing to take the opportunity to make use of the dance drama as a creative, forceful art. In the terminology of art criticism, fantasy and dream differ greatly. At its best, Kalpana may be called dream. It was a drab dream, devoid of aesthetic perception, ideational excellence, and rhythm in psychic current. Now, it's probably not a usual thing to begin talking about a film by looking at a negative comment, but the reason I wanted to you all to pay attention to this is because this situates Uday Shankar in the Indian dance landscape. So, if we are looking at the time of Uday Shankar, and especially the time of the film in the 1940s, it is a time of the revivalist movements in dance. And of course, the biggest of those is led by Rukmini Devi Arundale, who is forming the Chennai Kalakshetra, and the formation of Bharatanatyam as a neoclassical dance is coming up. And at this point of time, of course, dance drama comes to signify a certain form that is indigenous to India. It is something that is being widely discussed, and everyone is talking about the form, which is why there is this sentence which says that he has refused to take the opportunity to make use of the dance drama as a creative, forceful art. So on one hand, of course, you can look at this review as a review which comes from a position of not understanding the filmic medium and what it brings to the plate. But on the other hand, you should one can also look at it as basically a position where a certain kind of a dance was coming to signify the Indian dance that was getting valorized as the Indian classical dance. And somehow the kind of dance that was being presented by Shankar, his own dance vocabulary, which was widely discussed as Shankar style at that point of time. I'm not sure, at least as far as I know, he did not come up with a name as such for his style. But it was popularly called Shankar style in the newspapers and reports. And that form and his position as a dancer who has not really gotten trained in India, but who has began dancing in the 1920s when he is studying in London, where he has gone there to study art. And he gets into dancing and then joins the troupe of Anna Pavlova, the famous Russian ballerina, the international figure. And eventually he continues that. And every time he would come to India, he would make his troupe from India. He would pick up people from India, pick up different kinds of forms from India, and then go back. And his reputation at that point of time was like of an international dancer. It was not of a national dancer. And hence, when we look at this particular review, we understand where these people are coming from, the kind of purity and puritanism, if I may say, of a certain kind of dance which is recognized as Indian. Of course, the type that is, attested by and is solely for the upper caste, middle class populace of the country. You can see that where these people are coming from, and that of course makes Uday Shankar different from the rest. And that is one way to look at Uday Shankar, and that's definitely one of the predominant way that Uday Shankar has been, and his work, especially the film Kalpana, and in general his life work as a dancer performer, has been analyzed. And there has been 5 or 6 very significant works. One is by Ruth Abrahams, then you have Juan Ardman, then you have Urmimala Sarkar Munsi, who actually has a chapter on the film Kalpana. And then you have Prarthana Purakayastha, and you, of course, have Mohan Khokar, who is his official biographer. So these 5 people have extensively worked on Shankar, and most of them have located Shankar in this fashion. This has been the location of Shankar. So, on that note, I would like to say that as I see this film, as I see the film of Kalpana, what my understanding of, if we may call the thesis statement of the film, because the film is a thesis. The film is a thesis, which is, in fact, Uday Shankar himself says that it is a film which is a propaganda for art and culture, and it has a certain kind of a thesis statement. It would be the need for state patronage for art and culture in the newly emergent nation state. And he himself, as I said, calls it a propaganda for art and culture. And with that vision, he's beginning to make the film at a time when he doesn't really know a lot about filmmaking. And it's not even like, he's exceptionally interested in cinema, but he's making it because he wants to raise funds for his center primarily. And he wants to create a space or for art and culture in the newly emergent nation state. So although he is different in terms of the kind of dance he's presenting or his positionality vis-a-vis the neoclassical movements that are happening, they are two schools of thought who are actually still trying to define what should be Indian art, what should be Indian dance, and what should be the more importantly, as in the case of Shankar, what should be the vision of the state, the Indian state, for Indian performing arts and culture. So, with that, I would say that the film, if we look at the film in general, coming to the narrative and the film text has 3 layers. The first layer is, of course, the layer of the narrative, where you have the story. There's the personal narrative. As I said, it's a semi-autobiographical story. Quickly to sum up for those who have not had the chance to watch the film is about this character called Udayan, and he comes from a family of zamindars in a provincial village. He's a sensitive child, not understood by materialistic elders. He tries to express his artistic temperament in the little musical dance dramas which he puts up with the help of his friends. In this way, he tries to adjust himself to his environment. Another influence in his life is Uma, a girl who has come from Udayan's village. For some childish reason, they have quarreled and do not meet for years. Udayan's uncle eventually sends him to the village school, where he discovers like a friend, a sympathetic friend in the figure of a drawing master. And Udayan grows up to be a painter, much like Uday Shankar himself, and goes on to Banaras for further study. Although we know in real life, Uday Shankar traveled to London to study art. In Banaras, Udayan feels drawn to the art of dancing, and with the aid of Noor, which is incidentally the only Muslim character in the film, and a couple of other girls from quote unquote good family, he forms a dance troupe. And in among this troupe is of course Uma, who later in the film it's revealed that she is the person who was his childhood friend and playmate who had left for Banaras at an early age, leaving the village. So when, like, Udayan meets this girl and falls in love, both of them fall in love, and with a little bit of financial help from the friends of this girl called Kamini, who also then meets in an accidental manner. He goes up to build a big troop, and the troop travels across the country, and finally, they reach Bombay. And this is where Uma comes and joins them along with the other troop members. And Kamini is extremely jealous towards Uma, and it creates a lot of tension between them. So Uday's greatest ambition in the film, we are told, is the establishment of a great cultural center in school, which will be like, the center for national dance, like, national theater. He calls it a national theater. And in this project, he is initially helped by some of the wealthy friends of Kamini. Kamini is his not just his lover, but she's also someone who's coming from a rich class, like in terms of the decor of the house where she is in. We can understand that. So eventually, high in the Himalayas, the Kala Kendra, that is the school and the theatre, come into being. Kamini follows Udayan and Uma to the Kala Kendra, where this love triangle sorts of unfolds in a near tragedy when Kamini tries to stab Uma. And finally, the calamity brings Udayan to the realization that he loves Uma, and the story has a sort of happy ending, not exactly, and we'll come to that why. But seemingly it has at least it has a union between the lovers. This is the layer of the personal narrative, very simple, and uh, in fact, like a norm another film, if you pick up from the same era, it would probably have more complexities in the narrative, but this is a pretty much extremely simple narrative that is there. The second stage, or the second layer of the film, is the layer of the performances. That is the layer of the dance performances. And when we look at the dances in the films, many of these dances are dances which have already been choreographed before the film is made. These are dance items that Shankar has performed across the world with his troupe, and some of them, of course, in India as well. And some of the significant ones are Tandava Nritya, Labor and Machinery, Shankar Parvati, Purusho Prakriti. These are some of the compositions which already existed, which probably explains why when we see these dances in the course of the film, they come as dream sequence. They are not integrated as such into the film narrative, but rather comes as some kind of a extra diegetic element. That brings me to the dream. And the dream sequences, yeah, one way of looking at it is that it's a simple solution to incorporate these dances, but the dream is also something which is central to Uday Shankar's pedagogy and generally his educational principle. In fact, Ruth Abrahams, she writes about something called a dream exercise that the students at Almora's Cultural Center were expected to do, which was a typical exercise that would present the opportunity for the students to call upon all of their senses and then respond to the movement in relation to their own experience and at their own pace. For example, a movement would be presented to the students rather than merely imitating it until the body had kinesthetically memorized the movement, which is generally how classical dances are done. The students were asked to analyze the movement by locating it in their sight, that is, to see the movement in space. Then they were asked to place it into a basic identified movement pattern. And this is in performing arts, it's called the arc theory. The students then executed the movement within his own spatial arc, sensing the stress and release within the body, identifying those areas affected and in what way, so that the distinction of stress and release in the muscles were noticeable in order to identify the movement kinesthetically as well as visually through direct observation. So this is the background to the dream sequences that are there, and this is a sort of the for the ground to prepare for what is going to come in the film in a lot of ways. Because when we see the dream sequences, when we see the kind of the purpose of the dream sequence, also the purpose of the dream sequence is also in a sense that way, it has an analytical purpose. It's not just taking the story forward, but it's commenting on the story. It is it's almost like an annotation to the story, if I may say so. So this is where these are the three layers of the film, Kalpana, that are there. Now, I would like to argue that, as I said, this is a film which is a certain kind of a submission to the government or to certain kind of an imaginary audience, a call for the need for state patronage for art and culture. Now, why so? The question is why is it so? Why does the newly emergent nation state need to go ahead and patronize art and culture? And in this context, I would like to argue, and this is something I have argued in my thesis as well as elsewhere, is that this stems from a certain understanding and a certain ideology of art and performing art, especially performing art, as an amateur practice. That it is not something which is to be done professionally. That is to say, it is not something that is going to earn you money. This is the art and the commerce should stay separate. And this is a sort of a dominant ideology across the discourses about dance in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and even later, actually. In fact, until quite recently, I come from a classical dance background, and there would be a lot of, criticisms of about the people who are going into these Bollywood dancing and making money, because you're an artist, how can you not be poor and starving? Like, that's the idea. So that kind of an ideology of what I call the ideology of amateurism, that is something that is palpable across the entire film. When we see at the very beginning of the film, where like Udayan is first going to Banaras and trying to create a troupe, we see, for instance, that there are these people who are these girls who are being brought, and Noor, his friend, tells him that see, these people have come, but they are girls of good families, and their fathers are all professors at the university, and hence progressive, of course. But somehow, whatever it is, just remember that they are not here to make money. So, in a lot of ways, what I argue in my thesis as well, that this kind of a disassociation and disavowal of of the kind of labor, the physical labor that goes into the process of performing arts, the process of dance, that comes across in this a refusal to acknowledge it as a profession. But why it needs to be refused as a profession, one way of looking at it is, of course, that there was the association of performing arts as with the hereditarily brahminically relegated lower castes, and these are the communities who were thought of as professional performers. And then, when the neoclassical movement was also being formed, one of the main thing was to disavow this connection, to somehow, break that connection and say that, oh, we used to have a golden past and we used to have these, great amazing dance forms, and they have now got corrupted because of these people's influence, and now we need to rescue it. Some people said it was the British influence, some people said that, it's because of the practitioners, but whatever it is, the main idea was that there is some kind of an authentic, pure existence of this form somewhere elsewhere in the past, and we need to revive that and we need to bring it forth at the cost of completely invisibilizing and disavowing whatever happened in between, of course. So this was the general sense, which is also why when finally in the 20th century people from upper caste, middle castes, and like, so-called quote unquote educated urban families started sending their daughters for dance lessons and dance education, there was initially a lot of taboo. And one of the ways in which the taboo was addressed was by saying that, oh, but they are not professional dancers, they are actually amateur dancers. In fact, there would be dance troupes which would be called amateur troupe, and there would always be a certain kind of an, like in Calcutta, for instance, but there would be these troupes, especially Tagore's family was one of the major patrons of such troupes. And they would do these programs, and then they said that, okay, whatever money we raised, even when it's a ticketed program, this is going to be donated to so and so school, this is going to be donated to so and so purpose. So whatever you do, however you dance, God forbid people should acknowledge that you are actually putting in a labor that needs to be paid for. So that was a basic ideology which we also see in Hindi cinema. And if you see, look at the Hindi cinema of the time and even later, you will see that, the good girl, the between the vamp and the heroine is someone who is always like, they are dancing, but they are dancing as a hobby. They're dancing on stage in a college function, or they're dancing by themselves inside the house, never in the public. Or when they are in the public, it's a dream sequence again, the great rescue of the dream sequence. And on the other hand, you would have the quote unquote vamp, or the other woman who would be shown as someone that goes ahead and works in a bar or as a cabaret dancer. And the main idea is that this is a woman who earns her living by dancing, and one needs to separate oneself from such women, because they are the vamp and we are the ideal Indian woman. So this is a motive which plays all through Kalpana, and which is why the need for the state to step in, the demand for the state to step in order to become the patron of the arts. Because as long as, the money is forget about getting paid for it, even the money that is required as the seed money to do a program, as long as one goes to some, tries to get that money by through other means, in this case the spring festival that takes place by the end of the film, or rather by the middle of the film and continues till the end of the film, or the people that Kamini invites over for a party, asking them to donate money for the cause of Udayan's performances. All of these cases, the idea is still at the level of that, these are all corrupt people, these are all bad people, and it goes on to the extent where almost the message comes through that if you're rich, you're bad. And like, in fact, there is one very interested, the person who finally gives Udayan money to build the cultural center, and he writes a check of 50 lakh rupees. It plays out very interestingly. So this it's from the party I was just talking about. The person comes out and gives the check to Udayan. Udayan takes the check and crumbles it and throws it away. and it lands in a garbage bin where a small boy who's picking rags, he's sitting, and he finds that thing and he picks it up and then runs to Uday and chases him and then gives him that particular check, which is a crumpled up, and Uday opens it and sees it's 50 lakh rupees. And when he was being handed out the check, Uday is told that not all rich people are bad by the person who's donating, but the very fact that, the when the person is giving him the money, he can't take it. The fact that you need the mediation of that rag picker boy, it again harps on that particular ideology, that you have not gone and taken money directly from the people. You have, there is a mediation of the poor Indian boy, right, who is somehow helping you disavow the fact that you have taken from a rich businessman. So, and this is something which continues till the end of the film. Like, even by the end of the film, where they have managed to raise so much money, like if they are seen as, it's shown that, they're carrying trunks and trunks of money through their performance, and all these Rajas and Maharajas who have come to watch the performance, they've given them so much of donation. Yet, when, the money is being taken up, and they are taking the money and going up, and there's these boys and girls in the troupe who are shouting it's a success and so on and so forth, you hear in the background Uma's voice, and Uma is like, shouting almost like, as a cry, as a distressed cry. She's like, hey Bhagwan, ye kya ho gaya, oh God, what has happened, as if a disaster has happened. But this is what they wanted. They wanted to raise money for the film. They wanted to raise money for the center, and they have achieved that, and it's a success. Yet Uma says this, and then of course it dissolves out to the there's a cut, and we come back to the main storyline, which is of a script writer, that is Uday Shankar himself, who is reading out the story to this again corrupt producer in front of his office, where it is written, box office is God, and who refuses to make the film and refuses to hear out the entire story. But the very fact that a success of that nature is still shown as what the hell happened, and this is such a terrible thing that has happened, a lament or a cry, it shows that, there is this constant undertone in the entire film, where we need money to make art and culture, but we can't take money from people, because that would mean that we are commercializing art and culture. Hence we need the state. Hence we need the state to come in and step in and go ahead and, save us by patronizing art and culture. So this is what I think is the dominant and main thematic that strews together all the different strands that are there in the film. Now, what are these strands? The question comes, of course, what are these strands? And of course, there is art and culture, but art and culture is not the only thing that is being addressed in this film. A lot of the things that are being addressed are burning issues of that time. A lot of the things that are being addressed, often problematically, which are basically things that are debates and discourses that are happening around. One of the major things that you see is, of course, the discussion on gender and the way the entire gender politics is being talked about. On one hand, you have this narrative which shows two women fighting over this one man, and visibly trying to murder each other. On the other hand, you have this kind of a situation where you have different dance items that show and articulate the need for women's access to public spaces, or their right to wear what they want to wear. And there is this scene where there's a ramp walk happening, and these girls who are clad in this very extremely body hugging kind of a churidar, and they're walking down. And when they're walking down, there's an old woman who comes, and the old woman says that Aren't you, don't you have any shame? Well, what are you going to achieve with all this shamelessness? And then Uma is seen turning back to the woman to say that what have you achieved with your shame? At least we are walking, right? So that is, of course, something that it can be seen as a progressive moment in the film, but not for long, because right after that we realize that this entire sequence is something which is shown to instigate the princess and the rich audience class to go for almost a bidding war on how much money they will donate to the cultural center. And in the course of this, what we see is there is this, a meter, that an emotionograph, they are calling it. It's like a scale which maps the emotions of the K princess and the audience. It's obviously a fantastic thing. And that has shot up to the sex appeal, that there's a particular strand. And you can't possibly miss the moral undertone in all of that. I mean, yes, there is the fact that there is a certain kind of a progressive articulation for women's right to dress or right to public spaces, right to education, also in another sequence. But at the same time, it's also extremely tragic to note the kind of moral undertone that it comes with, and which directly leads to that final lament of Uma, because this scene, this particular sequence, gets repeated at the end of the Spring Festival. And finally, when when we hear that it is a success, right before that the emotionograph breaks. And why does it break? It's because of there's so much of excitement in the audience, and that excitement is induced by a repetition of the same sequence of the ramp walk. So this is also, like, very indicative of the fact that there is a certain kind of an association of moral corruption with the display of the woman's body. So while on one hand, of course, it is a treatise for performing arts, which obviously involves a certain kind of display of any body whatsoever. How do you do a performing art without your body? But at the same time, there is also this discomfort, so to say. So for instance, Urmimala Sharkar Munsi, she has said that this, she has marked out the sequence, and she has marked out the sequence and calling it a certain kind of a moment of ambiguity, so to say. I'll just read out that quote that she gives. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. So, Sarkar Munsi says a large part of the critique of Uday Shankar's movie at that time came from within India. His storyline was criticized on the ground that it portrayed Udayan, the principal protagonist, played by Shankar, being surrounded by women. Some harsher views also mentioned Shankar's attraction to women and their overawed reaction to his presence on stage. The source of discomfort could also be about the way the female roles were framed. Women's roles in Kalpana are crafted out largely on the basis of Shankar's stage productions, portraying the ambiguity of the woman's position in the minds of the nation planners. On the one hand, she remains the perfect woman, the mother, the ideal, emotional, possessive, yet submissive lover. On the other hand, in several scenes, she emerges as an educated equal partner of her male counterpart, challenging age old shackles put around females in the name of tradition, and also defying the discomfort about the female body in public. So what I feel is that, what Sarkar Munsi sees as the ambiguity of the woman's position in the mind of the nation is indeed what the paternalist view of what Madhav Prasad calls the paternalist view of the Nehruvian state entailed, where, you have the woman and the peasants as the two groups towards whom this vision was extended. So, equality in education and entry of women in the public space was no new discourse at that time. It became the bedrock of the women's reformation movements, beginning with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in the 19th century Bengal, alongside the often ignored and largely forgotten contribution of Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule. As for the choice of women to wear clothes that did not follow the norm, one needs to remember that such actions were only taken under the careful guardianship and with consent from the patron male. From Bimala's husband's insistence of her removing of the veil in Tagore's Ghare Baire, or popular narratives about Satyendranath Tagore and even Jyotirindranath Tagore cladding their wife in breeches and taking them for horse rides to Maidan, one of the central public parks of early 20th century Calcutta. It is therefore not an ambiguity but a continuation of the reformist vision of the nationalist elite who took pride in their progressive stance. Moreover, in Kalpana, the educated equal, free to wear clothes as they walk down the ramp, is juxtaposed in the film with the rising scale on the emotion meter, which touches sex appeal, as I just mentioned. It is impossible to miss the moral undertone of this entire sequence. So, and all of this, it just brings me back to my argument about the ideology of amateurism, whether it is for the position of the woman or whether it is in general about performing arts. This is something which comes back over and over again. The other themes that, of course, very important theme that it will be very wrong to not acknowledge in the film. One is, of course, the theme of agriculture. And as I said, the peasants were the other, group, social group towards whom the Nehruvian state wanted to extend their paternalist vision. And that is something we definitely see, especially in the sequences where there is one entire dance, which is the farmers' dance. And this is also the sequence where, for the first time, a tractor is introduced, a tractor with the word Kalpana in Hindi etched on the back of it. And how else how much more can one be make the point that Nehruvian developmentalist vision is in line with what Uday Shankar's vision about the modernization of agriculture was. Because clearly, as we see in another section of the film, which is the labor and machinery section, he is absolutely against industrialization. He's very vociferously arguing against industrialization, marking out the industrialists, of course, as the villain of the story. That goes without saying. But in general, just the very idea of the quaint village, the beautiful village, but the village now in penury and hence need to be rescued. So who will rescue? The state will rescue. So that kind of a narrative becomes very, very prominent in several sections. One particular section that I personally find extremely interesting is this part where I will just talk about this dance segment there, which is there is the agricultural issue being talked about. Okay, and in this particular section, what we see is yeah. So there is a particular sequence, if we see, where there is a Naga dance, something that is called the Naga dance is being staged. And it, of course, comes with a variety of costumes, and some of those costumes are extremely unusual and quirky. And these particular costumes, they have shown that people are literally getting shaken by that. And some people come and they ask Uday Shankar that, so my Raja is asking if this is an African dance. So I will just respond to that part a little bit. So, Uday Shankar, as we know, is someone who had a lot of international exposure. So it was this in his international exposure that added to the basic educational vision that was reflected in Kalpana, where we are shown a Naga dance at the spring festival that is mistaken by some king in the audience as African dance. Shankar asks the narrator to clarify, who goes on to announce, Hollywood shows Hindustan as Africa. It seems this has confused you people. It is the duty of all parents to allow their children to travel the world to widen their knowledge. The greatest onus lies on our schools, colleges, and universities. So, this is something that comes through the narration. But what is interesting to note is the framing of this Naga dance alongside the response of the audience who scream and rise up from their seat looking at the masked dancer in fear right before this announcement. The unmistakable exoticization and otherization of the Naga dance, alongside a lecture on the importance of exposing oneself to global culture, comes across as rather ironical. Here, in his attempts to challenge the stereotype of the African, Shankar ends up stereotyping the Nagas, a name that refers to multiple tribes with distinct cultural forms. Such instances of anthropological Orientalist gaze are dime a dozen in Hindi cinema of the time, and Shankar's Kalpana is no exception, where the representatives of the various marginalized communities are allowed to display their body while the voiceover narration for their performance is reserved for the guardian class of the state, who are the only ones with the access to the mic. In a lot of ways, the Orientalist gaze to which Shankar himself was subject in the West was redirected by his lens on the numerous dance items of the native Indians. As Sharkar Munshi notes about the reception of Shankar in the West, the notion of the Orient created a homogenized identity for the countries with distinct communities and culture, most of the times grouping together a completely heterogeneous group of people under the category of people who were spiritual, mysterious, exotic, erotic, and ultimately feminine in their servility, which made them all the more enticing. Mysticism and mystery ruled the voice choices made of representation in the performances of Ruth St. Denis, Maud Allen, and Anna Pavlova, and so many others. At that moment in history, the entry of a male dancer, albeit a handsome and attractive one, was sensational. As Amala Shankar often recalls, quote, after a performance and after innumerable curtain calls, when the clapping was going on, Uday stepped forward to acknowledge the appreciation, to fold his hands and say thank you. One woman sitting in the front row exclaimed in awe, he talks! When one sees the focus of the choreographies of the folk dances in the films on the costumes and props, of occasional mismatch of the same, especially the appropriation of Manipuri dance of the Meitei people as Bengali, one cannot help but feel that if Shankar was directing the same gaze that was once directed at him to the indigenous population of the subcontinent. Besides, the people belonging to the various marginal ethnicity and tribes, the framing of the farmers in the section on agriculture is very, very interesting to note. The aforementioned section begins with a group of women with lamps evidently performing some Hindu ritual. We also see what looks like Brahmin priests performing yagna, followed by a group of women dancing with sickles in their hands under the shadow of a giant plow. Again, an image which keeps coming back in Hindi cinema over and over again, right? So, across the 50s. Throughout this section, the dance is repeatedly interrupted by shots of sunburned faces of peasants who are looking on, a grim expression on their faces. After the plow dance, the radio commentator starts his narration, even as the camera keeps looking at the grim faces of the real peasants. The narrator's booming voice announces, See the faces of these peasants carefully. As the camera cuts back to the narrator, he emphatically says, perhaps they are asking, who can properly pray to the plow? You, the camera turns to the princess. No, he continues as the camera moves back to him. We, the peasants, the plow has given us life. The plow has fed the crores of lives in this country for thousands of years. We pray to the plow. The narrator's tone rises as he continues, but we also have to see today's reality. Famine is threatening our country repeatedly. We have to depend on other countries for grain. What is significant in this section is the absolute silence of the peasants who can only emote, like they can smile when they approve of something the narrator is saying, but cannot speak. As if one of them were to speak up and assert their right to pray to the plow, rather than having a narrator announce that over microphone by appropriating their identity in identifying himself as we in relation to them, someone in the front row could exclaim in awe, they talk. So this is, I think, something very interesting in the film in terms of, how the different kinds of framings and the gazes that the film brings forth alongside the different ideas. So Shankar's Kalpana overall is therefore a treatise of its times. It is seeped in the ideology of amateurism and follows the Nehruvian vision of the centralized nation state where the enlightened would educate and reform the mass from above, following what Prasad calls the ideology of passive revolution. Besides being a significant documentation of modern dance in India, it is also a thesis on the nation state. It takes up important issues of education, art and culture, agriculture and industrialization, the issue of women, of peasants, mulls over the differences between the urban and rural, many of which conform to the Nehruvian developmentalist vision. We have also seen how the film follows a semi autobiographical narrative where the point of departure from reality becomes the decision to make the film. To remain, and I will explain this why, because in the narrative we see that, they decide that they are going to choose to do a spring festival rather than make a film in order to raise funds. And in fact, in reality, it's the exact opposite that had happened. In reality, in the cultural center, this debate was raging where it was split between the members were split between two. With the senior members, they were asking for making of the film, moving on to the film medium to raise funds, whereas the others, including including Amala Shankar, were actually wanting to hold on to the idea of doing tours and concerts in order to raise funds, knowing very well that it's probably impossible to do so, especially in a country which was at that time struck by the World War II. So, in that sense, I say that the point of departure from the reality becomes the decision to make the film. To remain faithful to the articulation of the filmic narrative position, the film is therefore always already a failure in Shankar's vision. It stems from his failure to maintain his center, and what started as a planned project for a year goes on for 5 years before the film is finally released in India, where the power had already been transferred. Despite the raising of fund inside the story of Kalpana, Shankar knew it was never to be a reality. As history has shown, the Almora Center is yet to be in a functional state despite recent attempts at renovation. Maybe Shankar foresaw that his dream could not be a reality even in the new nation state, despite all the patronage that was coming in, because his dance, despite everything, was not Indian enough, no matter what he thought. And this is possibly why the film ends in the disillusioned cry of the scriptwriter, which is also played by Shankar, who has just been refused by the producer to be given money. He stands under a street lamp and says, I'm standing in the darkness under the light. My country is drowning, the world is drowning, humanity can't find a way. God, will this country always be enslaved? Will its people never gain sense? How long will my country sleep? How long will my Kalpana remain a Kalpana? And here I would like to read it as, how long will my Kalpana, that is dream, remain a Kalpana, that is fantasy? And in his cry, then, do we hear the lament of his student Gurudat's Vijay, जिन्हें नाज है हिंद पर वो कहाँ है? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pritha, for this elaborate discussion of the film. Obviously, this is a film that you have been with for a long time. So you have, you've shared the material relating to the film, also given us such an elaborate reading and discussion of the film. The film is open for discussion. Anyone who wants to talk about the film? Please unmute yourselves so I know you want to talk about the film. Just to get the discussion going while everyone kind of gathers their thoughts on the film, Pritha. Two things that struck me really about the film. Obviously, I've just watched it once, and that too over two sessions, and there was so much happening on the screen, so I was not entirely sure, what really, where it was really all going. So maybe I need to watch it again. But one thing that struck me about the film was, as you said, the structuring of the film. Generally, film theorists are want to talk about, the narrative and the spectacle as a kind of, as a way of pausing the narrative. Here, it's almost as if the narrative is really pausing the spectacle. So it's a virtually given short shrift. I don't think very much in terms of character development happens or any such thing, because this is a film that is meant to showcase, as you said, a certain, not only dance, but also a certain vision for dance, in the Indian context. But I was also thinking, I liked very much your reading of the way in which, you read this film as a kind of, way of engaging or endorsing the engagement of the state in the arts. And so on. And yet, I think tragically, Uday Shankar himself would not get the kind of state patronage that, if his film is asking for that, it doesn't anyway happen. But I also thought that here is a model that, probably Uday Shankar has seen in other places of Europe, particularly the Soviet Union and places like that, where this kind of it's part of building of a national culture. So the state and the state machinery is very much a part of the process of building a national culture. So maybe it is a vision that is also coming from his experience in Europe and what he thinks of as what or how dance and the arts in general should go forth. Also, your point about the position of dance itself, I think that was a wonderful insight. this idea of amateurism, and I think that comes through the horror of commercializing and professionalizing dance. Even as efforts, to classicize it and remove it, purge it of all its other kinds of associations. So, and yet this is not a film, though it is of those times. It's not a Kalakshetra kind of a vision for dance. So I was really fascinated with the vision for dance, and the way in which it thinks it can realize that vision through a kind of almost like another kind of Shantiniketan, which will foster an atmosphere of dance, and also whole pedagogy revolving around the arts. So there are many things that the film seems to be kind of bringing in, and as you said, it's kind of all over. It's not like there's one kind of ideology that is evident in the film. I think there's so much that is happening, often in very contradictory and quite confusing ways. But overall, a fascinating film, really one of a kind of the film, I think. Like I was in many segments watching it kind of open mouth. Wow, this is happening in 1948 kind of a thing. So thanks so much, for asking us to watch this film, a film I would have otherwise really missed watching. Thanks, Pritha.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nicola. Thank you so much for that. To just respond to what you were talking about, the vision, where is this entire kind of institutional vision coming from? In a lot of ways, as far as Shankar is concerned, he is getting it from Pavlova. He's directly imbibing it from Pavlova. And in fact, what Coker says is that what he genuinely did learn from his association with Pavlova was organization, teamwork, a sense of duty and responsibility, punctuality, and above all, showmanship. And very significantly, Pavlova is someone who told him that, if you want to learn our dancing, get out. You should go to India and bring something to show us. There are such wonders in your country, and you want to try our things. And literally, he, not literally, metaphorically, she kicks him out and says that you go back and build your troop and come back. And I want to see what you can bring from your country. Similarly, his other teacher, Rothenstein, with whom he was studying initially in the Royal College of Art, London, he said that, I feel that there was some kind of a competition that was going on at the Royal College of Art, and Shankar had bagged two very esteemed prizes, one for a self-portrait and the other for a canvas titled Dance in Moonlight. So a lot of everyone was appreciating that a lot, but Rothenstein, his advisor, he dismissed them as patchwork and asking him to take a break from school for 2 months to study art and history of India. And Rothenstein says, I feel you are taking our disease to India. Please don't do what you are doing. I have visited India and been with Tagore and traveled and marveled at your ancient paintings and sculptures. The soul of India can be seen in them. I want you to recapture that soul. So in a lot of ways, when Shankar is building from scratch, one of the things that he holds on to very, very strikingly is the fact that he is not going to adopt any Western dance forms. He's going to, whatever he's going to do, he's going to only use Indian style and Indian dance forms. However, from the West, what he picked up and what was very important for him was institution building. in that sense, he's a perfect model for Chatterjee's Home and the World. He follows exactly that kind of a trajectory. And it's interesting that you mentioned Shantiniketan because, in fact, Shankar is clearly influenced by certain ideas of education from Shantiniketan, the open air kind of education system, or the focus on the physical training along with the intellectual training, that kind of there are certain things he does pick up from Tagore. But Tagore, on the other hand, if you're thinking about a model, Shantiniketan itself was possibly a model right out there. Because in the 1920s, and this is actually something very little spoken about, unfortunately, Tagore builds a proper dance institution in Shantiniketan. Alongside other things that he is building up a dance institution, a dance curriculum, and he is getting people from across the world. And unlike Uday Shankar, who doesn't even, as Coker says, that he will not even learn ballroom dancing, he refused to learn. Tagore is someone who goes and he dances with in some social function in Europe. He goes and he picks up some dance forms there. He gallop is one of the gallop and lancer. There are two dance forms which he picks up, and he comes back and immediately writes a song in the beats of those dances, and then he teaches it to the students, where the students can actually do that. He gets people from France, from Germany, from Russia, obviously Japan and other Asian countries are there. But in a sense, Shankar has often been called an internationalist like Tagore. But and in fact, that is one of the dominant argument about Shankar. But Shankar is not so. Like, if you look at his vision of his dance or of the film Kalpana, like even within Kalpana, if you remember that sequence where all these people are coming to like getting entry into the spring festival, and there is some young Indian man who's wearing a coat and suit. Basically, he's suited, and the people say that no, you can't enter. But just behind him, there are these foreigners who are coming, some British sahibs, and they are wearing suit. Like, how can you let him enter and you are not allowing me to enter? Like, he is wearing his national dress, you are not wearing your national dress, that's why I'm not allowing you to enter. So that kind of a position is something very much there. In terms of institution, absolutely Shankar borrowed heavily and was heavily influenced by the institutions of, not just in terms of Anna Pavlova, but in general, how art institutions and a holistic dance pedagogy, art pedagogy should be, where what it involves. Like, if you see, there are shots, there's a montage where after the thing is just set up, and you will see there are these moments where he's teaching students the parts of the brain, he's teaching students anatomy. And so all of these things shows that it's not just about just doing the dance or just teaching a dance movement. Also the dream exercise that I was talking about, it was using dance as one of the many languages that are available and to express a certain kind of art.
Also thought that there was some found footage, as I mean, footage that he's using from, I don't know, various kinds of places.
Yeah.
It's curious the way he's building up, particularly the latter half of the film.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it looks like it's some footage from documentaries, which is
Yeah,
kind
some
of,
of them, like, they
yeah.
clearly, he's wearing this shades, and he's sitting on a director's chair where there are these uh, quote unquote tribal
Yeah,
dances
yeah,
happening. And that's why
yeah.
I'm saying that gaze, that gaze of the colonial master gets almost reproduced in the way he looks at the dances of the marginalized in India.
Anyone else who wants to come in at this point? I think, yeah, Ajanta says she has to log off as she has an okay engagement tomorrow. Vasudha Chatterjee says enlightening and thought provoking. Anyone? Okay, so people are still joining in. Okay, Geeta Tarakeshwar, Baidurya, anything to say? Geeta, yes, go ahead.
the extended last section of the film, kind of, I thought it anticipated those, the Republic Day pageant,
Absolutely. Yeah,
the
yeah.
dance. So to that extent, it's like, he so self-consciously made the film in order to, give us some kind of an idea of what a national culture or a national dance form should be, and that seems to kind of almost turn real when you recollect the Republic Day pageant. And also, the filmmaking itself was, so fascinating. Especially, I thought the influence of German expressionism, and
Absolutely.
that dance sequence where where he talks about industrialization almost
Yeah,
reminded me of Chris Lang's this one Metropolis. So
absolutely so.
these are
Very
some
much so.
these are some of the things I thought were very interesting about.
Yeah, yeah. And you're absolutely right, Geeta. Like, I actually should have mentioned, I forgot to mention that, is that about the influence of German expressionism is very evident, with the kind of lighting, the very high angles, and the kind of shots that are there, the shadows, the immense amount, whenever there's a conflict situation, you see the conflict in the beginning of the conflict, and the rest gets played in the shadows. So you have that kind of a high contrast kind of a thing. And also in terms of the set, and this is something that I should have mentioned, which is the sets, and they're very elaborate sets, right? We see them, but incidentally there were no sets in the film. And the when Shankar gave the entire scenario to Vasan said that, this is something that's going to cost 9 lakhs. And Shankar said, I don't have that much amount of money. So then the story goes that he saw his son playing with these building blocks, like Lego blocks made of wood, the indigenous ones, and then that gave him an idea. And with that, what he started doing is that he ordered for these boxes, like wooden boxes, wooden blocks, and whatever was there he created using those boxes. In entire sets, everything was created using those boxes, and they would take about half an hour for setup and 15 minutes to dismantle, and they will move on to the next thing in the same space. So he in one of his interviews he says that, I used to hire these people whose only work was to just dismantle and restructure the blocks. Other than that, there was nothing. And in fact, the labor and machinery section, you see these wheels kind of a thing, right? Those are projections of parts of a typewriter. So it's the entire thing is a light and shadow play. And if that is not a very optimum use of film, as a medium, I don't know. Like seriously, for someone especially who says that he did not know anything of filmmaking, I thought that was an incredible thing to be achieved.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
My God, yeah. Anyone else? Tarakeshwar? And Basav has also joined us now. Tarakeshwar, Basav, anything to add to the discussion?
Okay,
Yeah.
if no one else is there, uh, thank you, Pritha, for that elaborate discussion of it. The points that you've tried to trace out through your presentation, one was about recasting the uh, dance as art. So it's a romantic notion of art that was coming in during that time.
Yeah.
So I think that is an interesting fact where uh, art becomes a kind of individual expression, number one, which where there is some kind of talent, merit is involved in that. So it is nothing to do with commercial or collective training. It is not craft basically. So it is an expression, and that has to be respected. So that's the kind of romantic notion of art that comes in prominently in that film. And this notion of art or artist, it continues even today in the popular culture, in
Absolutely.
many films. So in that sense, it's a kind of precursor to that. And even in literature, we find this kind of artist as a kind of reclusive
Hmm. Hmm.
kind of person who is, let's say, compared to
Absolutely.
others, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And but what is interesting is that this coupling of this romantic notion of art with nationalism.
Yeah.
So this where we differ from the West, where there is a gap between nationalism and then the romanticism. Here they come together, and how it works out here is something that is worth uh, investigating in that sense. So the issues that you traced out about tribals, farmers, women, gender. So all these are again the problems with our nationalist discourse. That is
Absolutely.
a prominent there.
Yeah.
So this romanticism coupled with nationalism is playing a major role there. And as you said, uh, because it is at the cusp of forming the nation state, uh, so it is anticipating the nation state and is also seeking that if you are removing the art from the realm of market, from the transaction, uh, money transaction, then naturally it has to be, if you're removing king as the patron or the industrialist or zamindar as the patron, then there should be state as the patron.
Exactly.
So what state should do is something that this film is also thinking about at that point of time. Uh, I think these are the two issues that I wanted to bring forth. But the other issue that one is about, yes, it's a kind of national modern is projected there about education, women's education, workers. There's anti-feudal sentiment, anti-monarchy sentiment. There's questions of equality, religious tolerance, trying to be include everyone into this national culture, a kind of framework, trying to build a national school of dance and things like that. Uh, there's also some kind of Marxist elements which come in there. So actually, it is not anti-industrialization. I think it is anti-capitalism that comes in there. So it is modern in that sense. So and there is also a character which is called as a Marxist character who interrupts the
Yeah.
uh,
The communist. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So in
I,
that communist, though is made fun of, uh, there are certain elements of communism that is appropriated, but it is made fun of. That is
absolutely.
quite interesting. That
Yeah.
is happening in this film, I thought.
Absolutely. I think thank you so much, Tarakishan, for especially that last point because again, the very idea of a certain kind of modernization he is not something that Shankar is against. That's very clear, especially with his attempts to modernization, like his endorsement of modernization of agriculture with that tractor and all of that. Those things he's fine with. But industrialization and the time of capitalism, as you have rightly pointed out, is obviously something that he's very vociferously arguing against. But as is probably the problem with the communist movement in our country, the problem of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. The problem is that it ends up being a certain kind of narrative where let capitalism not come. Okay, let us not, if we can prevent capitalism from entering, then everything will be sorted. At the same time, arguing against feudalism, at the same time talking against caste communal and all of those issues. So that I think is a little bit of a shaky position, but I really don't blame Shankar for that, because he is a product of his time. And if we look at the general IPTA narrative, if we look at Dharti Ka Lal, if we look at Neecha Nagar, if we look at even Dr. Kotnis ki Amar Kahani, and generally the Shantaram films, and that moment, I think, was such that there was an imagination that somehow we could modernize the village and the agriculture and not get into industrialization of at the level of capitalism, especially urban industrialization. I guess, industries were allowed. So I think there was a certain kind of, and also this conflation, no, as if the rich is bad. It's almost like across the film it keeps coming back over and over and over again. And the idea that money is bad, or being rich is bad, this kind of it is a very dominant Indian left ideology, so to say. So in that sense, obviously, there is a similarity between Shankar's position and the position of the Indian left. And in fact, Kalpana is often thought to be a continuation of that Dharti Ka Lal and Neecha Nagar moment of IPT.
Okay. Anyone else who has anything to say? Basav, anything to add to the discussion? You've joined late, but if there's something that you want to say about the film, please do go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very sorry for joining late. I was stuck in traffic. I went out and somewhere else. Kalpana, I mean, I think one question I wanted to ask probably was, I think the way the dance is picturized also, it broke. I mean, it is said to have been broken. I remember attending a lecture by Mr. Kothari, who's one of the dance scholars, and he showcased the film as the one which sort of showcased a new way of Indian classical dance, how it's picturized, breaking the mold of the traditional classical idiom of it. So I wanted to understand more, if you can speak a little bit.
Sure. Thank you so much, Basil. So first thing that I would like to say is that what we see in Uday Shankar's Kalpana is mostly not classical dance. It is a very common misunderstanding, other than certain moments where we see like a glimpse of Kathak or a glimpse of Kathakali, or a little bit of Manipuri, which is not shown as a classical dance. In fact, you don't see any Bharatnatyam anywhere, which is very, very significant, considering that this is a moment when Bharatanatyam is becoming the national dance form in a sense. What we see, however, in Kalpana is a certain kind of a dance picturization, a certain kind of looking at a framing of a dance for the film. Because earlier, before that, of course, it would be wrong to not acknowledge the efforts of Shantaram, who has done a huge, he has tried to right from the 1920s or 21, like he has started playing around with different kinds of song and dance sequences, where he has tried to make them stand out and have a certain kind of a spectacle, the spectacular identity. What Uday Shankar is doing, luckily for him, he is working at a time when we already have got the idea of close up. So there are already technicians who know how to do close up. It's not like 1920s when Shantaram is working with grand scale spectacular dances for the first time. Because after that, in the 1930s onwards, he sort of stops engaging with dance at that level and tries to incorporate dance as a everyday movement in his films, as he is moving closer to realism. He will come back, of course, again in the color era later. So when Uday Shankar is coming, the technology of close-ups and the kind of editing that is available to him, what he is doing as a dancer is he is showing how to edit and how to frame a dance. So he is telling you that, see, when you are picturizing a dance, you don't just put the camera at the distance and let the person dance. Yeah, dance is about paying attention of the detailing of the body movement. So when you have the, like, movement of the hand, you focus on the movement on the hand. When you have a movement of, like, an elbow or a shoulder, you focus on that. So that is why what he is doing, if you see, he's breaking down the parts of the dancer body in a way of fetishizing them, of course, but also bringing it to the fore, saying that this is a new vocabulary of dance that I have produced, different from the existing Indian neoclassical dance vocabulary. And I want people to also be aware of this new vocabulary, which is also one of the major contributions of Kalpana as the only living documentation of the kind of vocabulary of dance language that Shankar style dance had. Does that answer your question, Basa?
Yes, and I also wanted to say that it is interesting that because we spoke of nation state and the time the film was made, I think 1948, right? In the sense, being aware also that these dances are sort of positioned as the Indian dances, like the sort of the Indian classical dances, and breaking that at that time would have been something. I don't know. It seems like a very difficult political choice because I think some of the picturization also pictures the dancers as machines. If I'm
Yeah, that's a particular segment called Labor and Machinery, which is one particular dance item that Shankar had choreographed before the film, and he incorporates that in the film.
yeah, so which is almost sort of a contemporary
Absolutely.
more symbolism or motifs represented using a classical dance, and it goes against in somewhat against the positioning of Indian classical dance as this purely sanitized idiom which cannot be broken.
Yeah. So, as I said, Uday Shankar is not trying to portray them as classical dances. Uday Shankar is trying to portray them as Indian dances. So it's basically, two schools of thought. So on one hand, you have the Indian classical versus Indian folk, and they are trying to vie for the position to be recognized by the state as the Indian dance forms. Similarly, Uday Shankar has created his own dance form by incorporating idioms from everyday life, as much from everyday life as from the different folk dances and regional dances, and even some forms of what would later come to be recognized as classical dances like Kathakali and all of these. And he incorporates that to produce a new form of his own, which in his head he is still calling an Indian dance, and he is presenting it as an Indian dance. So yeah, of course it's a radical thing that he is doing, but he is not doing a radical thing in terms of opposing the existing Indian classical dance idiom. This is also coming up simultaneously because the neoclassical movement does not begin till the 1920s, which is exactly when Shankar has also beginning to dance, albeit in the West. So both of these are parallel movements in one way of looking at it, who are both trying to say that, well, we are the Indian dance. That would be my answer to your question.
Thank you. And how was the reception in India? Do you, if you hear?
Yeah, I shared that in the beginning. So in India, it had a little lukewarm reception, especially in Chennai, where it had to face bitter criticism because of, obviously, it strayed so far away from the puritanical dance styles of in neoclassical, the sanitized dances as you are talking about, which is why it faced a lot of criticism, but it was widely recepted in the West, especially in America and Europe.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the film or responses to the presentation? Yes, Tarakeshwar.
Yeah, following Basav's comment, uh, this contemporary touch to the classical, I don't want to use the word contemporary and classical. I would like to put it as though he is looking at this dance form as a kind of in a romantic mode, but the relationship between society and the dance form is much more radical. So he's using this dance form to address certain issues of industrialization of workers, farmers, everyone. So in that sense, to what use he is putting that into is completely different from the way others were trying to shape it simply as a kind of an art form of India. So it's not simply doing it as an art form of India. It has a function to perform there.
Yeah.
It has an organic function to perform in the present society is something that I think he was looking at. Of course, he was also trying to create an Indian style dance which can be showcased in the world outside. And he's also trying to uh, put together all the available styles in India together. Both are happening at that point of time. But much more than that, making this dance work for the issues of the present.
Yeah.
How do we respond to the issues of the present through this medium is something that I think this film is focusing on.
Absolutely, Tarakeshwar, you're very, very right. In fact, what is very interesting to note that it's not like Uday Shankar is making an Indian dance too present to the West. Uday Shankar is someone who has been in the a part, an integral part of the West, the modern dance movement that has been happening in the West, beginning with the 1900, and during the 1920s and 30s, he is an integral part of it. He has been a part of the evolution of modern dance in the West, which begins with Oriental dance, something called Oriental dance that I briefly touched upon. And with that, he gains entry into the Anna Pavlova's troupe. And the items he is performing are a Hindu dance, Radha Krishna, and I think Shiv Parvati. So, and when he say a Hindu dance, it is the Hindu here does not just mean the Hindu religion, but it is a representative of India, like Hindu Sindhu, the land of India, like that way a Hindu dance. The way the Orientalists used to refer to the word Hindu. So this is the way in which Shankar gets caught into the modern dance movement, which of course then goes on to evolve into a medium across the world where dance is being used to voice different kind of positions and different kind of like dance as a everyday part of life, right? That kind of a thing that is coming, the everyday language of dance is evolving. So when after doing all of this for 20 years, Shankar is coming back to India, setting up a center at Almora in the beginning of the 1940s, between 1941 and 44, if I'm not wrong. He is actually bringing all those ideas that he has already gained, the experience he has gained from the West, to then borrow from the existing Indian folk dances and all of these things to produce a new idiom, which he feels should be recognized as the Indian dance, because it is doing justice to, in his head, all parts of the country, rather than something like say a Bharatanatyam, which is coming up specifically from one particular caste, and that binary that is being produced in the other half between the folk and the classical. So in his world, there is no distinction between folk and classical. They are all together, and they together form what we know as the Shankar style idiom.
Okay. Uh, yeah, there's a comment in the chat box about how you made the film come alive. Neha Mishra says.
Thanks,
Um,
Neha.
mhm.
Neha, Sameer are both my colleagues at Kriya.
I see.
And
Okay.
yeah, so,
Okay.
and Vasudha here is actually my student from Symbiosis.
I see.
And
Okay.
she's recently joining JNU Cinema Studies for her master's. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, if there are no more interventions in this discussion, I think we can thank Preeta for this wonderful session that we have had with her discussing the film. And thanks to everyone who participated in the discussion. So next week, same time, we will meet to discuss
Can I
yet
ask
another film.
Sorry, Nikhila ma'am. Can I
Yeah.
ask one question?
Yeah. Oh, sure, Basav. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, I think I wound up prematurely. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to seek Preetha's opinion about how we would place Kalpana in the Indian film history, and how would we read it, its significance or its contribution to Indian film lineage.
Sure. So I might have mentioned it in parts, but just to like summarize it, I think one of the main things that Kalpana does, inaugurates for Indian cinema is the idea of dream sequences. And the very fact that you can have these elaborately staged, spectacular dream sequences, significant among them, of course, being Avara, right? We are all very familiar with that. And that kind of those kind of set buildings for the dream sequences, the use of smoke in the dream sequences. In fact, if you look at films prior to Kalpana, you will not see any of those things. Similarly, that kind of the framings where you break down the frame into parts to highlight different parts of a body of a dancer and so on and so forth. It's not quite widely used, but it is also something that is being introduced by Shankar there. Another thing I think is very important in terms of Shankar's contribution are, his students, who he is bringing. First of all, in Kalpana itself, he is, of course, introducing Padmini. He is introducing so many others who go on to become big stars in their own right in the South Indian film industry, especially Madras film industry, but also some of them in the Hindi film industry. But also from his school, he's giving us a Guru Dutt and he's giving us a Zora Sehgal, and we all know the kind of long lasting effect that all of these things have. And when in fact Guru Dutt begins his life as a choreographer, he is not beginning his life as a director. And later on also he goes on to make sure choreograph each and every one of his song sequences, and which is why they are so unique. And the kind of things that we see, one can probably say, would not possibly have turned out the way they have without the kind of training and exposure that Shankar's influence gets there. Yes, just to answer the question on the chat, thank you so much for reminding me of that. In fact, this is being shot in Gemini Studios, and Chandralekha is being shot in the next door, literally, at that point of time. And they are releasing simultaneously. And if you remember, there is a scene in Kalpana where these women are playing with a dapli kind of a thing, and they go and put it on the ground. And then when the men raise it, under that there are these women who are sitting there. It has been conjectured, I'm not sure, that this is the sequence that inspired Vasant to choreograph the drum dance in Chandralekha.
Okay. Yeah. So I always go back to Chandralekha for the spectacularness.
Yeah. A lot of that came because he has been handling the scenario of Shankar for the past 4 years before he's making Chandralekha.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Nicola.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot, everyone, for participating in this fascinating discussion. Hope to see you all next Saturday. And thanks, Pritha, once again. Have a good weekend and see you all next week. Bye.
Thank you
Good night.
so much.
Thank you, Pritha. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all of you for being here for this late and amazing time, like talking about this film. Thank you, Nicola and Geeta, especially for the opportunity.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.